The flowers arrived before the betrayal did. That was the thing Mira kept thinking about. Later, when she was sitting in the back of a car that smelled like leather and gunpowder and something she couldn't name. Cedar, maybe, or the particular cold of a man who had never once been afraid. She kept thinking about the flowers. White peonies, 300 of them. She had counted. Of course she had counted. Counting was the only thing she had ever been truly good at, the only thing that had ever made anyone look at her like she was worth keeping around. The flowers had arrived at 7 in the morning. The wedding was at 2. She had 7 hours to become someone's wife. She did not become anyone's wife. The venue was a restored estate outside of the city. Cream walls, arched windows, the kind of place that existed to make people feel like they had always belonged somewhere expensive. Mira had borrowed the deposit money from her sister and spent 11 months paying it back in installments she couldn't afford. She knew exactly what everything cost. She had built the budget herself on a spreadsheet she kept color-coded and obsessively updated, because that was what you did when you grew up the way she grew up. You tracked every dollar because you had learned early that dollars disappeared without warning, and left you standing in a kitchen with nothing in the refrigerator, and a mother who said, "We'll figure it out," like that was a plan. She was standing in the bridal suite at 12:45 when her maid of honor, a woman named Deb who she had known since community college, came through the door with her face arranged in a way that meant something had gone wrong. Mira recognized the face immediately. She had seen it on bill collectors, on landlords, on professors handing back exams she had failed before she learned how to study. "Don't," Mira said. "Mira, whatever you're about to say, just give me 30 seconds, she turned to the mirror. She looked at herself in the white dress she had bought second-hand, and altered herself because she was not going to pay someone $400 to take in a seam she could take in with a borrowed machine and 2 hours of patience. She looked at her hair, which she had done herself with YouTube tutorials and 3 tries the night before. She looked at her hands, which were steady because they were always steady. Her hands had never once shaken from fear, only from cold. Only from hunger, once or twice, a long time ago, when she was 17 and too proud to ask anyone for anything. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." Deb told her. His name was Cole Merritt. They had been together for 4 years. He was a project manager for a commercial real estate firm, pleasant-looking, good at barbecue, the kind of man who remembered to say thank you to servers. Mira had thought he was steady. She had specifically chosen him for being steady. He was currently in room 14 of this same estate with Mira's cousin, whose name she was not going to say, not even in her own head, not today. Deb knew because she had walked in on them 20 minutes ago, looking for extra corsage pins. Mira stood very still. She was familiar with the specific arithmetic of a moment like this, how it subdivided itself, how time went strange and granular, how the mind started running calculations it had no business running. The deposit, the dress alterations, the flowers, 300 white peonies at $4.60 per stem. The rehearsal dinner she had organized in a rented space because the venue charged extra for the night before. The invitations she had addressed by hand because the calligrapher was $62 more than she had in the miscellaneous budget. Cole Merritt was in room 14 with her cousin 47 minutes before Mira was supposed to walk down an aisle toward him. She picked up her bouquet, white peonies, smaller version. She had made it herself. "Call the officiant," she said. "Tell him we need 10 minutes. Mira, you don't have to go out there. I'm not hiding in this room." She looked at Deb. "I'm not doing that." She went out. The guests were already seated. 83 people. She knew because she had done the seating chart 3 times and the final count herself. 83 people in white-covered chairs on a lawn that smelled like cut grass and late summer, turning to look at her as she came through the door at the back of the aisle. She stood at the top of the aisle and did not walk down it. She stood there and looked at the empty space at the altar where Cole was supposed to be standing. He wasn't there. He had been told to be there at 12:50. He was not there. 83 people waited. Mira heard someone whisper. She heard a chair shift. She heard her mother somewhere in the 3rd row, make a small sound like a question, and then she heard the main doors of the estate open behind her. Not the garden doors she had come through, the main doors, the ones that faced the drive, the ones that guests had come in through 2 hours ago. Those doors. She did not turn around. She heard footsteps. Not one set, several, but one set was louder than the others, more deliberate, a pace that moved through space like it had already decided the space was its. She heard the footsteps stop. "Miss Quinn," said a voice, very close to her left. She turned. She had seen photographs of Harlan Voss exactly once, in a newspaper article 3 years ago, that a coworker had shown her on a phone screen in a break room, pointing at it the way people pointed at car accidents from a safe distance. "That's him," the coworker had said, like she was introducing Mira to a weather system. He was taller than photographs suggested. That was the first thing. Photographs flattened people, erased the quality of how they took up space, and Harlan Voss took up space the way certain buildings did, not aggressively, not loudly, but in a way that rearranged everything around him by simple fact of existing. He was wearing a suit the color of charcoal, no tie, collar open one button, and he looked like he had walked here from somewhere that had different rules than everywhere else. His eyes were grey, not the soft grey of overcast skies, the grey of something much older and much less interested in your comfort. He had a scar along his left jaw that disappeared into the collar of his shirt, thin and pale, the kind that had been there so long it had become simply a feature of the terrain. "Miss Quinn," he said again, and it wasn't a question this time, or a greeting. It was more like a confirmation, like he was checking something off a list. "I don't know you," she said. "No." He glanced past her at the aisle, at the empty altar, at the 83 people who had gone completely silent. Then he looked back at her. "Your groom is not coming, I'm aware. He left through the service entrance 4 minutes ago. Your cousin was with him." Mira held her bouquet with both hands. She did not ask how he knew this. She had a feeling that asking how Harlan Voss knew things was a question with answers she wasn't ready for. "What do you want?" she said. "A conversation. Now, preferably before your guests take out their phones." She looked at him for a long moment. 300 white peonies and a color-coded spreadsheet and 11 months of installment payments and 4 years of choosing someone she thought was steady. "Okay," she said. They went into a small anteroom off the main hall. 2 of his men, and they were clearly his men. She understood that immediately, the way you understood a fact that your body registered before your mind caught up, stayed outside the door. One of them handed Voss a folded piece of paper before he closed the door behind them. The room had a settee and a mirror, and a small table, with a water pitcher on it. Mira sat on the settee, Voss stood. He looked at the folded paper, and then he set it on the table without opening it. "You work at Callaway Financial," he said. "I'm an accounts analyst. You've been there 4 years, 3.5. He noted the correction. She could tell he noted it by the way he didn't react, the practiced stillness of someone who had trained himself to receive information without giving anything back. "You're good with numbers," he said. "I'm adequate with numbers." She paused. "I'm very good with numbers." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The shadow of where a smile might have been, once before he decided smiling, was an expenditure he couldn't justify. "I have a problem," he said. "I have about 40 of them right now, so I'm not sure I'm the right audience." "Your problems," he said, "can be made to go away." Mira looked at him. "My problems include a non-refundable venue deposit, 300 flowers, and 83 guests, who are currently sitting on a lawn wondering what to do with their chicken or fish entree choices. How exactly do you propose to make those go away?" "I'll cover the losses." He said it the way other people said it might rain later. "The venue, the catering, whatever was paid that won't be returned. I'll cover it. Why? Because I need something from you." "What?" He picked up the folded paper from the table and held it out. She took it. She unfolded it. It was a contract. Not handwritten. Typed, formatted, with section headers and clause numbers, which told her that this had been prepared before today, which meant he had known today was going to happen before she had. She read it twice. She read quickly, but she read carefully, the way she read everything. Every clause, every condition, every subordinate clause within a subordinate clause. The terms were specific. He needed a wife, not a real wife, a legal one, someone whose name would appear on documents, whose presence at certain events would satisfy certain requirements, whose existence in his household would close a gap in a set of arrangements she wasn't fully meant to understand from this document alone. The duration was stated clearly. 18 months. At the end of 18 months, she would be compensated. The number was written out in full, then in parenthetical numerals, the way legal documents did when the number was large enough that ambiguity would be catastrophic. Mira read the number twice. She looked up. "This is real," she said. It was not a question. "Everything I do is real," he said. "You had this written before today." "Yes, which means you knew Cole was going to—" "Yes." She waited for something to happen in her chest. Rage, maybe, the kind that made your vision go white. She had felt that before, years ago in smaller doses, at smaller betrayals. She waited for it now. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more familiar. The cold arithmetic of a situation laid out in front of her, the rapid calculation of variables, the question her brain defaulted to in every crisis, which was not "why is this happening?" but "what are my actual options here?" Options were as follows: walk back out onto that lawn, face 83 people and her mother's face in the third row, return the dress she couldn't return, pay the installments on the venue deposit with money she didn't have because the clause was in the contract she had signed, spend the next 6 months explaining to everyone she knew what had happened at her own wedding. Or, "I have conditions," she said. He tilted his head very slightly. "I keep my job, I go to work every day. You don't interfere with that. Acceptable. I have my own room, my own space. Whatever this arrangement requires in terms of appearances, we negotiate in advance. I don't perform things I haven't agreed to, also acceptable, Bal. If I find anything in this contract that's misleading or unclear, I come back to you and we renegotiate. In writing. I don't do verbal amendments." He looked at her for a moment. The grey eyes did something she couldn't quite read. Not softness, nothing like softness, but something that might have been the recognition of a type of person he hadn't expected to encounter. "Acceptable," he said. "And my mother," Mira said. "She's in the third row. Whatever story we tell the people out there, it has to be something she can live with. She's been through enough." A pause. "I'll leave the story to you," he said. Mira looked at the contract again, at the number, at the 18 months. She had spent her whole life doing the math on things that weren't supposed to be math problems. Love wasn't supposed to be a calculation. Trust wasn't supposed to be a risk assessment. But she had done the math anyway, every time, because that was the only tool she had ever been able to count on. And it had worked well enough to get her here. Here being a lawn with 300 flowers and a man who had just handed her the strangest offer she had ever received, and the strange, vertiginous realization that she trusted the paper in her hands more than she had ever trusted Cole Merritt. The paper was specific. The paper had clause numbers. The paper did not make promises it couldn't quantify. "Do you have a pen?" she said. She walked back out to the lawn alone. She stood at the top of the aisle and looked at 83 faces looking back at her, and she kept her chin up because she had never in her life let anyone watch her fold. "Cole won't be joining us today," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. "I know that's not what any of you drove here to see. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." She stopped. "Actually, I'm not sorry for the inconvenience, because none of this is my fault, and I'm done apologizing for things that aren't my fault." She heard someone in the front row make a sharp sound that might have been a laugh. "There's food. There's an open bar. The catering has been paid for. The flowers are already cut, and it seems like a waste to send everyone home. So if you want to stay. If you don't, I understand." She paused. "I'm going to take a minute," she said. "And then I'm going to come back and have a glass of wine and talk to my mother, and anyone who wants to tell me I should have seen this coming is welcome to save it." She turned and walked back inside. The reception happened, improbably, without her. She stood at a window on the second floor and watched people eat and drink on the lawn below, and she felt the strange floating dissociation of someone who had been dropped out of a narrative she had spent 4 years building, and was now watching it continue without her. Voss appeared beside her at some point. She didn't hear him approach. She suspected he had never once in his life announced himself before entering a space. "Your mother is talking to my associate," he said. "Which associate?" "Benton. The one with the grey jacket. He's telling her that we met at your firm 6 months ago and that things accelerated after Cole left." Mira looked down at the lawn. She found Benton, grey jacket, patient expression, nodding as her mother spoke at him. Her mother was gesturing with her wineglass in the way she did when she was processing something by talking it to death. "She'll want details," Mira said. "He has details. You prepare details. I prepare for most things." She looked at him sideways. He was watching the lawn with the same expression he had worn in the anteroom, neutral, observational, like he was running calculations of his own. "Why me?" she said. A long pause. "You were convenient," he said. "That's not the whole answer." Another pause. Longer. "No," he said. "It isn't." He didn't offer the rest of it. She didn't push. There would be 18 months to push, and she had learned early that information came faster when you stopped demanding it. The house was on the edge of the city, behind a gate she hadn't expected, up a drive lined with trees whose names she didn't know. She saw it for the first time 2 days after the wedding that wasn't a wedding. Arriving in a car she hadn't been asked to get into so much as been told was waiting. It was large. It looked old in the way things looked old when they had been maintained perfectly. Preserved rather than aged, everything intact, nothing soft or worn or broken. The kind of house that had never once asked permission to exist. Her room was on the 3rd floor. It had a window that looked out over the back garden and a desk and bookshelves that someone had stocked with what she could only assume were Voss's idea of what a woman might want to read, which turned out to be a strange mix of financial history, one novel about a woman sailing across the Atlantic alone, and several extremely thick architecture books that she suspected had been there before she arrived. She put her laptop on the desk. She set up her spreadsheet. She opened a new tab and built a column for expenses and a column for duration, and a column she labeled simply unknowns, because there were always unknowns, and the worst thing you could do was pretend there weren't. She saw Voss at breakfast. That was the pattern that established itself in the first week. Breakfast, because he rose early and she rose early, and the kitchen was the kitchen, and avoiding it required more effort than simply being in it. His people were in and out of the house constantly. Men in suits. Women with laptops who spoke in clipped half-sentences and never introduced themselves. A woman named Petra, she introduced herself, which Mira appreciated, who appeared to manage something she couldn't quite name, a role that touched everything without being anything specific. "What does Petra do?" Mira asked one morning. Voss looked up from his coffee. "Everything I don't want to do. That seems like an important job." "It is." Mira poured her own coffee. "What do you not want to do?" He considered this with the seriousness he gave to most questions, which was a kind of seriousness she was unaccustomed to, not performative, not the seriousness of someone who wanted to appear thoughtful. Actual consideration. "Appointments," he said finally. "Anything involving appointments. You run a—" She paused, choosing the word carefully. "An organization that functions primarily on scheduled meetings and timed operations. And you don't like appointments." "I can operate within them," he said. "I don't like them." "What's the difference?" He looked at her with the grey eyes. Tolerating something isn't the same as accepting it. She looked back at him over her coffee. "No," she said, "it isn't. There was an event in the 3rd week, a dinner, the kind that had a guest list and a dress code, and the specific low-frequency tension of a room where everyone was performing a version of themselves and the performance cost them something. Mira wore a dress she had bought with her own money and altered herself, old habit, faster than asking, easier than waiting. She met, in the course of the evening, 6 men who looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism and 1 woman who looked at her with something more useful, curiosity. The woman's name was Renata. She was in her 60s and wore 3 rings on each hand, and had the watchful quality of someone who had survived things by paying attention. "You don't look like what I expected," Renata said. "What did you expect?" Mira said. "Something decorative." She said it without malice. "Harlan's had decorative before. It doesn't tend to last." "I'm not decorative," Mira said. No, Renata studied her. "What are you?" Mira thought about this honestly. "Functional," she said, "accurate. I balance books well, and I don't panic when the numbers are bad." Renata smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that meant something had been confirmed. "The last person who tried to balance Harlan's books ran." "I don't run," Mira said. "I renegotiate." She found the discrepancy by accident. It was a Saturday. She was working at the desk in her room, her own work, a client analysis she'd taken home from Callaway, and she had borrowed a pen from the study downstairs and come back up and sat down and opened her laptop and, because she was the way she was, noticed that the browser had been left open on a financial document that was not her financial document. She should have closed it. She knew she should have closed it. She closed it halfway. Her cursor was right there, right at the X, and then she read 3 lines and stopped closing it. The document was a ledger, not a complete one. A fragment, copied, she thought, from something larger. It covered a period of 7 months and detailed a series of transfers between entities, with names that were clearly not names but codes, the kind of thing she recognized from coursework she'd done in financial compliance years ago, before she'd understood what she was studying, or why it mattered. There was a discrepancy, not enormous, not the kind that screamed, the kind that whispered, a small recurring error in a column marked Services Rendered, a number that was off by a consistent fraction across 12 separate entries, the kind of thing a person could miss if they weren't looking for it, the kind of thing that was very difficult to create accidentally because it was too consistent to be random. Someone was skimming. Mira closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in the quiet of her third-floor room, with its window over the garden and its architecture books and its column labeled Unknowns. She opened the laptop again. She wrote down what she had seen from memory, because her memory for numbers was the thing she had built her entire life on. And she wrote it in a document she saved under a name that meant nothing. And she closed the laptop again. Then she went downstairs to find Voss. He was in the study, which was where he was on Saturday evenings. She had learned his patterns the way she learned most things, by observation, without announcing that she was doing it. He was reading something that he set aside when she came in, and she noted that he set it aside without marking the page, which either meant he had memorized his place or the page didn't matter. She sat down across from him. "I need to tell you something," she said. She told him. All of it, what she had seen, what she had identified, the pattern, the entries, her reconstruction of the numbers from memory. She told it the way she would have told it to a client at Callaway, precise, sequenced, no editorial. He listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were still. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You read the document," he said. "Yes, you memorized the figures, yes." "And you came to me." He paused. "It's your house," Mira said. "It's your ledger. I don't know who else in this building I'm supposed to trust, and I'm not in the habit of trusting people I haven't verified." He looked at her for a long time. The grey eyes were doing something she still couldn't fully decode. Not the absence of expression, but the presence of something underneath it. Something he was not going to give her access to without a process she hadn't completed yet. "The person who created that discrepancy," he said, "has been in my organization for 11 years. I know that doesn't make it easier." "No," he paused. "It makes it more expensive." Mira looked at him. "What do you need from me?" "I need documentation, a formal reconstruction. Sourced, dated, with your methodology visible. That will take time to do properly." "How much time?" "4 days if you give me access to the complete records. 2 weeks if you don't." He nodded once. It was the nod of a decision being made and filed. "You'll have access," he said. She stood to go. She was at the door when he spoke again. "Mira!" She turned. He looked at her from the chair, still, deliberate, the way he always was. "You could have closed the browser." "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about it. She had thought about it, upstairs, in the room with the architecture books and the column labeled unknowns. "Because it was wrong," she said, "and I don't walk past things that are wrong just because they're inconvenient to fix." He didn't say anything. She went upstairs. The 4 days were the longest she had spent in the house. She worked at the desk in the study he had opened to her. The actual study, the locked room she hadn't been in before, the one with the real files. And she built the documentation the way she built everything. Layer by layer, source by source, each number traceable back to its origin. No gaps, no assumptions, no places where you had to trust her word without evidence, because she was never going to ask anyone to trust her word without evidence. Voss came and went. Sometimes he stood at the window while she worked. He didn't interrupt. She didn't ask him to leave. On the second day, he brought coffee and set it at the edge of the desk without being asked, and went back to what he was doing. On the third day, she asked him how he had gotten into this. The organization, the work, the life that required a locked study and a guest list, and men in suits who communicated in half-sentences. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Inheritance," he said finally. She waited. "Not money," he said. "Position." "Obligation," he paused. "My father built something that required maintenance after he was gone, and I was what he had. Did you want it?" "No, but you kept it. It was already built," he said. The alternative was to walk away and let it collapse and hurt the people who depended on it. She turned to look at him. He was at the window, looking out at the garden in the grey afternoon light. "That sounds," she said carefully, "like something a person tells themselves to make staying feel less like a choice." He turned from the window and looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it does." She turned back to the documentation. He didn't move from where he was standing. She didn't ask him to. She finished on the 4th day. She printed the documentation and organized it into a file and put it on the desk, and went to find Voss and told him it was done. He read it the way she had written it, carefully, completely, without skipping. She respected this. She had known people who asked for documentation and then skimmed it and missed the part that mattered. He did not skim. He closed the file. "This is thorough," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "Thorough is a byproduct." He looked at the closed file. "The person responsible is someone I've worked with since I was 23. Mira said nothing. "He would have known that I'd have to deal with this," Voss said, "which means he expected me to be in a position where I was more likely to overlook it. And the reason I might have been in that position," he stopped, "was because of whatever gap the contract was meant to fill," Mira said. He looked at her. "You worked that out. I had 4 days with your files and nothing to do but think." She paused. "The contract, the timing, the reason you needed someone who looked like a wife. Someone created a situation that was supposed to leave you distracted or exposed or both, and they underestimated the fact that I was going to find the discrepancy. They underestimated you," he said. "People do," she said. "It's useful." He was quiet for a moment. "The 18 months," he said. "The terms of the contract." She waited. "They were written to address a specific set of circumstances," he said. "Those circumstances are going to change. The contract will need to be renegotiated." Mira looked at him steadily. "In writing," she said. The shadow at the corner of his mouth, the one she had seen on the first day, the one that was the address of a smile rather than a smile itself, moved. "In writing," he said. The garden was different in the early morning than it was in the afternoon. Mira had discovered this by accident. Insomnia, a glass of water, the back door that opened easier than she expected. She had found a stone bench behind the overgrown part of the garden that nobody seemed to tend, and she had started going there some mornings before the house woke up, before the grey-jacketed people and the half-sentence conversations and the schedule that wasn't her schedule, but that she was building her days around anyway, incrementally, the way you built most things. One column at a time, one unknown crossed off and replaced by a fact. She was there the morning after she finished the documentation. She heard the door open. She didn't turn around. Voss sat down on the bench, not close, not far. He had coffee. He gave one of the cups to her without being asked. She took it. They sat in the early morning quiet of a garden that was overgrown and imperfect, and not performing itself for anyone. Cole called, he said eventually. She looked at the garden. I know, Deb told me. She paused. He wanted to explain. Did you talk to him? No. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. There isn't anything he could say that would change the math. He made a choice, and so did I, and the only thing we have in common now is that neither of us is getting that venue deposit back. Voss was quiet. Do you regret it? He said. Signing. She thought about this honestly. She had a rule about honest answers, not compulsive honesty, not the kind that used truth as a weapon, but the kind that at least didn't let her lie to herself in her own head. No, she said. Why not? Because I know exactly what I agreed to, she said. I read it twice. I had conditions and they were accepted. I have a room and a desk and work I can do and something that pays what I can't afford not to be paid. She stopped. Cole felt like safety and turned out not to be. This, she gestured at the house, the garden, the particular grey morning, doesn't feel like safety. But I know what it is. I'd rather know what something is. He looked at her. The grey eyes in the early morning light were different than they were in the locked study. Not softer, not warmer, but less guarded. The way things looked when they had been awake long enough to run low on their performance. Most people, he said, want to feel safe more than they want to know what's real. I know, she said. I used to be most people. The garden was quiet around them. Somewhere in the trees at the back there was a bird she couldn't identify doing something repetitive and unhurried. She didn't ask him what came after the renegotiation. She didn't ask him what happened when the circumstances changed, and the contract shifted, and the 18 months became something else. She didn't ask because she had learned. Slowly, expensively, across a whole life of learning things the hard way, that the answers that mattered were the ones that arrived when you stopped demanding them on a schedule. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The garden sat in the early light and did nothing for anyone, and neither did they, and it was the most honest morning she could remember having in a very long time.